Whether you're building a new home or adding on, framing up the situation, or putting a roof over your head. If you need to rock it, roll it, or just get on with it, Hometime has a video to help you do it right. Transform your small bathroom into a luxurious master bath, or increase your home's value by updating your old kitchen. Keep your drains draining, your switches switching, and your footing firm. Whether you do it yourself or buy it yourself, Hometime's how-to video guides will help you get the results you want. Will make your next project a success. See your local home improvement retailer for the Hometime video that's right for you.
So do you think it's solid or veneer?
Well, this is all solid up here.
Oh, this is too. You'd be able to peel back the veneer, I think.
Ooh, this is a little loose. I guess that's something we could fix.
Oh, sure. Hi, and welcome to Hometime. I'm Suzanne Egley.
And I'm Dean Johnson. We're in a thrift store here thinking about buying this dresser. We're going to be devoting this videotape to stripping and finishing wood, both furniture and woodwork. And it looks like this guy might be our first project.
Yeah, I think so. You know, this sort of a job is very satisfying for do-it-yourselfers like us. The work isn't too hard, and there's a lot of tips and tools that make it even easier.
And there are some safety considerations you should be aware of before you start a project like this. So, stick around.
There we go.
Carry it up front.
A little heavy.
Hometime is made possible by Chevy Truck. Who brings you? Chevy full-size pickups. Today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S-Series pickups. Today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy's Astro all-wheel drive. Today's mid-size van with standard four-wheel anti-lock brakes. Chevy trucks. The most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. The National Hometime PBS series is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley's been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.
And one of the most important things about stripping and refinishing furniture is where you do it.
Having enough room and the right temperature is important, but the most important thing is probably ventilation. Because of the fumes from certain types of strippers and finishes and the dust from sanding, we think it's really important to have good ventilation.
So a basement, which is where you typically might do a project like this, probably isn't a real good place to do it. A lot of the dust and fumes could get up in the living areas.
You should consider using a screened porch or a garage, but don't plug in your space heater if you're going to use your garage during cold weather. You don't want to take any chances that it might ignite the fumes.
We're lucky. We have a nice large workshop area, but we're still going to use some fans to exhaust the fumes out the windows.
We're going to be demonstrating several different products for stripping wood. Now, traditional strippers have some pretty nasty chemicals in them, so we thought on this dresser we'd try out one of the newer types of strippers. Now, what color gloves do you want?
Oh, blue ones would be pretty good, I guess.
Okay.
Now, this is one of a couple on the market that are supposed to be pretty safe, so you don't have to worry about harmful or flammable fumes. But using gloves and goggles is still a pretty good idea.
Strippers come in different consistencies, and the two most common are liquid and something called semi-paste, which is just what it sounds like.
Well, the difference is the liquid will evaporate quicker and run off vertical surfaces, whereas the paste won't evaporate quite as fast, and it tends to cling to things better.
For these reasons, people generally think of the semi-paste as being stronger, so they use them on tough jobs, things that have several layers of paint on them. And they tend to use the liquid strippers if all that's coming off is a couple layers of varnish and some stain. Obviously, this is the semi-paste stripper.
Now, whenever you're dealing with painted wood, there's one factor that will determine how smoothly the job will go. When the piece was originally built, was paint applied directly to the bare wood.
Now, if the piece has paint on the bare wood, that first layer of paint is going to get stuck in the grain of the wood and in any little detail work, and it's going to be tough to get out.
If the piece were stained and varnished first, and then somewhere down the road somebody came and applied a coat of paint over the top of that, the paint's going to come off a lot easier.
So if you discover that you've got a piece that has paint over bare wood, you might get done and find that you've got some paint stuck in the wood. It's going to be real difficult to get it out. In which case, you're probably not going to be able to stain it. You're going to be forced just to repaint it. That's just a gamble you take anytime that you strip a painted piece of wood. Now, this dresser looks real promising. Now, you can see where the paint was rubbed away underneath where the knob was. and it looks like it was stained and varnished before it was painted.
Well, we removed all the poles, we took the piece apart, pulled out all the drawers. If we had doors, we'd take those off and remove the hinges as well.
All right, now there's one more job we need to do before we apply the stripper. We're going to rub up the surface with sandpaper. It'll help the stripper work more effectively.
Well, shall we?
Okay. This stripper goes on pretty good. We start at the top, obviously, so that any of the drips run down the side. And we lay it on pretty thick. You should layer it on about 1/8 of an inch thick.
The paste keeps working for a long time, so we can coat everything at once. The top, the edges, the drawer fronts, and the legs.
Okay, well, it took the two of us about a half hour to completely coat the dresser. And as you saw, the work's not real demanding, but you do need to be thorough and careful. However, the most important skill you need to have now is patience.
Well, that's right. It's real tempting to jump right in and start scraping away, but any professional refinisher will tell you, let the stripper do the work, especially a safe stripper like this one. You want to let it set around for at least a couple hours, if not letting it set overnight. Of course, that depends on the type of finish you have and how thick that finish is on the surface.
To help it stay moist and to keep working, we're going to cover it with a thin piece of plastic.
And we just want to keep it from drying out too fast. We're using a disposable plastic drop cloth here. It's just a real inexpensive thin one, and we don't have to do a perfect job here. We just want to slow down the rate of evaporation a little bit. There we go.
There's one more thing that you need to be cautious about. If there's any veneer on the piece, some of the strippers will dissolve the glues that hold the veneers in place. So you can't just walk off and leave it for a few days.
Now, you want to leave the stripper on long enough to do the job, but not too long. So we'll come back and check it from time to time. Well, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, in the meantime, let's clean up our brushes here.
Okay. Grab the cans here. All right. Well, we ended up letting it sit overnight, so the stuff ought to be pretty soft now. Looks like it's coming off pretty easily.
Oh, yeah, it's coming in big chunks over here.
Oh, it's sticking right to the plastic. Look at that.
Yeah. And we're going to use a couple different tools to get the rest of the finish off, and the most basic of these is a putty knife. You use it with a pretty gentle touch. You want to get up as much of the paint as you can, but you don't want to push so hard that you're putting gouges into the surface of the wood. And then, what do you do with this junk once you've got it onto the putty knife? Well, keep an old cardboard box nearby and clean the putty knife off by scraping it along the top. You see that we're not too worried about any little bits of paint left on the surface. The next steps should take care of the rest of this.
Well, this is coming up pretty good. Doesn't look like we have a paint over bare wood situation here.
Boy, this dresser has a lot of scratches in it.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's probably why they painted it to begin with.
Yeah. Well, I guess this means we'll be doing some sanding.
You know, I think you're right about that one. A putty knife works pretty good on flat surfaces. But once you get to the curved areas, like the front edge here, it gets a little tougher. Now, the first thing you want to do is take off as much as you can using a putty knife. Now, to get the rest of it off, you can try a few different things. A newspaper will work. Just rub that along to get it off. Or you could try one of these nylon brushes. That will work, although these do tend to get clogged up after a while. One thing that definitely works is this nylon scrubbing pad.
Well,
Well, we let the stripper do the hard work. It only took us about 3/4 of an hour to get the bulk of the old paint off, and it was pretty easy work.
Now here's where it starts getting a little slower and a little tougher. Actually, getting off the last few pieces of paint is the hardest part. But you don't want to stop the process at this point. You'll get the best results if you keep on going and do the whole piece at once. Don't give it a chance to dry out at all.
To get off the rest of the paint, we think it's a good idea to stay away from steel wool. The metal strands can get caught in the wood, and you can sometimes get strange chemical reactions between the steel wool, the water that's in the stripper, and the wood. And you could end up staining the wood. So we'll keep using these pads. You soak them in some of the stripper, and then you rub the furniture with them. This is going to pick up some of the little bits of loose paint. It's also going to get the stain out of the wood a little more.
Now, depending on the shape of the wood you're working with, you might want to try a couple of different things. For this particular piece of millwork, I think we might want to try this nylon brush. Yeah, that seems to be doing the job.
We're also using a small brass brush for some real tight spots. Brass is soft enough that it won't scratch the wood. Don't ever use a steel brush. It'll damage the surface and maybe even stain it. This is the labor-intensive part of the job. But if you follow the golden rule and let the stripper do the work, you don't have to use much elbow grease. You just have to be very careful and thorough.
In other words, you may not break into a sweat, but just go a little cross-eyed working on it. Keep the surfaces moist with stripper and keep at it until you're done.
Boy, these are looking pretty good. Now, don't be surprised if you have to go over some areas a couple of times to get all the paint and stain and varnish out. Again, it's usually the little crevices, the joints, and the detail work that are the toughest. You may find you have to go back to square one and go through the whole process again on these spots.
Well, now that we have the old finish off the furniture, we want to get off the rest of the stripper residue. And to do that, we'll use water and an old brush or a nylon scrub pad like this one. I don't want to use any more water than I have to. The more water you use, the more chance there is you're going to loosen the glue in the joints or warp the wood. I'm making sure I rinse out the pad often. This is to get the residue off of the piece, not just to push it around on the surface. Now, if you don't do the water wash, you could end up with a stripper residue drying on the wood. That could give you a real milky-looking coating.
It's not a good idea to let the water soak into the wood, so as soon as you can, you want to wipe the wood off with paper towels. And once you've wiped it off, and this is real important, you need to let it dry out completely before you do any finishing work on it.
So we spent, what, an hour yesterday on this, 2 hours today, and used 2 gallons of stripper, right?
Yeah, but I only think we used half of that second container.
Okay, all right, so we used, what, about 30 bucks for the stripper then total. Not a bad do-it-yourself project. Of course, you still have to put a finish on it. It's going to take a lot of sanding before this thing looks like new.
Yeah, but do we really want it to look like new? You know, this could be an antique, and I think it'd be really nice to leave some of these marks and these scratches in it. Yeah, it's going to give it a lot of character.
Well, you ought to get a look at the character on this side. Some little kid evidently took a ballpoint pen and wrote all over it.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe we should try and sand those marks out. Say, do you know what kind of wood this is?
You know, I'm not really sure. I thought it was going to be maple, but now I just don't know. I guess that's all part of the charm of refinishing furniture. You never quite know what you're going to find underneath.
Yeah. And before we put a new finish on this piece, we're going to strip another piece using some different materials. There we go.
All right, the next thing we're working on here is this old desk. It's made out of oak and mahogany. It's a prime candidate for refinishing. Now, we think it's solid wood, which would be nice, but the finish is kind of old. Sort of an ugly-looking color, and it is worn here in a few spots.
So, of course, we're taking out the drawers and taking off the hardware, but we also want to deal with these leather inserts here on the top. We priced out what it would cost to replace these, a couple $100, so that's a bit too much for us. So instead of replacing them, we decided we'd leave them in and then do what we can to clean them up once we've refinished the desk.
To protect the leather inserts while we strip the furniture here, we'll cover those areas with paper and masking tape. Now, to protect the little gold leaf that runs around the edge here from the tape lifting it off when we remove the paper, we'll just weaken the glue on the tape by applying it to a piece of clothing before we attach it to the leather. That should do it. And of course, do this very carefully. Actually, we put down 2 layers of tape for extra protection. Then, we use a 3rd layer to hold down the paper.
We're using a much stronger stripper on the desk than we used on the dresser. Now, this contains a chemical called methylene chloride, and it's pretty nasty stuff.
Well, methylene chloride has been the main chemical in strippers for some time now. But questions are being raised as how safe it is to be used. It can burn your skin, and the fumes can cause serious health problems.
And we've heard of some other problems with it, too. The fumes could corrode the inside of your furnace. And also, if you're using it in your basement and the vapors get into your house, you might find that they killed your houseplants.
I mean, all you have to do is take a look at the label. It says, contains methylene chloride, which has been shown to cause cancer in certain laboratory animals. A risk to your health depends on level and duration of exposure. Down the bottom here, it says reports have associated repeated and prolonged occupational overexposure to solvents with permanent brain and nervous system damage. In fact, methylene chloride may start being banned by the government. So if you are planning on using it, make sure you take every precaution possible. Safety clothing, plenty of ventilation. You might even want to invest in a charcoal respirator.
Just because when we strip the top, we're going to have to be real careful not to get stripper on the leather. I'm taking the top off. Now, on this desk, there's just a few screws that are holding the top on, but you might find in another piece that the top has been glued down, in which case taking it off is going to be impossible.
We're going to start off again with a semi-paste. Once the semi-paste has done its work, we're going to finish everything off with a liquid stripper.
Now, some people might say that you could just skip the paste and go straight to the liquid, but we're going to follow the principle of letting the stripper do the work. This paste is really clinging to the wood, and it's not evaporating the way a liquid would, so we don't have to keep wetting the surface down. We can put on the paste and let it do the work.
Methylene chloride works pretty fast, so we're going to do the drawers first, and then we'll finish off the other pieces. Now, with our painted dresser, using a non-toxic stripper, we let the stripper sit overnight. But with methylene chloride, especially working on just a thin coat of varnish and stain, should go pretty fast. In fact, oh yeah, look at that. The stripper's already started to liquefy the varnish and the stain.
This drawer has a little wooden beading on the front, and there's probably a little extra varnish that's collected in these joints. So I'm going to scratch into the joint with an awl. Then I'll put on a little more stripper. Now the stripper can penetrate here a little easier.
All right, this looks like it's coming along pretty fast. I'd say we're just about ready to start taking it off. This brush has been working all right, so I think I'll use that. I'm just pushing the gunk off. It's really pretty loose. Just pushing it down into this pan. It's underneath the drawer here.
Here around the beading, I need to work the stripper a little bit with this soft brush, just loosening everything up.
I think I've got off just about everything I can with my brush. I'll take the rest of it off with a paper towel. That's coming off real good. Okay, now the paste took off, probably about 90% of the old stain and varnish. Now we want to take off the last 10%. And to do that, we'll use the liquid stripper I was telling you about.
Now, at a professional furniture stripping shop, they might only use liquid stripper, but that's because they usually have these big tables that are going to catch everything that drips off. We don't have anything like that. We've just got a few buckets and trays, so we've been avoiding that liquid as long as we could.
With this liquid stripper, you apply it with a brush. I'm just putting it on, not trying to do anything with it. Then, take a little scrubbing pad and work the surface a little. And what I'm doing is loosening up any of the finish that's still stuck to the wood. I'm hardly pressing at all.
Now what we've got left is mostly just strippers sitting right on the surface of the wood. All the stain and the varnish has already been dissolved. All we have left to do is just rinse it off. I'm going to do that with some warm water. Use a fresh pad or brush, and as always, you try to use as little water as possible. The water neutralizes the stripper, so you want to make sure that you never get your pads mixed up and dip a pad that's wet with water into a can of stripper.
Well, the water wash will finish these two drawers, and we'll follow the same steps on the other ones. Well, these sections that have dried here really look nice.
Oh yeah, that's going to stand up real pretty, I think.
How's the top coming?
Well, the wood looks great. It took a little bit more work than I expected, so I'm a little nervous that some of the stripper might have leaked underneath the masking tape.
You gonna take this off now?
Yeah, I want to take a look here.
Huh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it doesn't look like any of the strippers leaked in there.
Yeah, it didn't pull up any of the gold leaf either. Yeah, it didn't pull up any of the gold leaf either.
Now, if there is any stripper that's leaked under the masking tape and gotten onto the leather, I want to wipe that up right away. I'm going to take a damp rag and wipe around the edges. Oh, thanks very much. Boy, now that the wood is stripped, the leather's looking a bit shabby by comparison.
Yeah, we might have to rethink what we do with it.
You might be right.
There's a couple of other things that we discovered underneath the finish on the desk. Well, for one, these panels aren't solid. They're actually mahogany plywood. You can tell by looking at the edge here. These pieces up here in front are solid, which is nice, but unfortunately they aren't mahogany. They're probably a soft wood like a poplar, so they'll stain up just a little bit differently than mahogany, something we'll want to watch out for.
Oh, look here. Here's a piece that's never been stained before.
Oh, sure.
If I look at the difference between the raw wood here and then this part that's been stained,
Yep.
and that really shows you the limits of trying to remove that stain.
And we could scrub on something like this all day long. There's no way we'd get it to match even close to that. Now, that's a good thing to remember about stripping wood. Depending on the type of wood you have and the stain on the wood, you may never get it completely out.
So it's real important that you work consistently all over the piece to make sure you get the same amount of stain out everywhere.
Well, besides furniture, a lot of people like to remove paint from the woodwork in their house.
So for our last stripping project, we thought we'd tackle something like that. It'll also give us a chance to show you another stripping product.
At Hometime, we're always moving from job site to job site, hauling around a lot of tools and materials. So we need a truck that can handle the workload, like the Chevy S-Series extended cab pickup.
This truck is ideal whether we're hauling materials from this construction site or driving down the highway. Its new step-designed rear bumper and lower step-up height make loading and unloading easier than ever.
This two-tier loading feature lets us expand our cargo space. We can store tools on the bottom and materials on the top. And with these convenient cargo tie-downs, we can make sure everything stays secure.
No matter what kind of load we carry, this double-walled construction protects the truck inside and outside and keeps it looking new.
This extended cab gives us even more space for extra tools or for bringing along a couple of helpers on the tough jobs.
This Chevy full-size pickup 4x4 is another one of our favorites for do-it-yourself jobs. This truck comes standard with a 4.3-liter V6 engine to give us enough torque and towing capacity to clear a couple of trees from this new home site. Okay, back up a couple of more feet.
Also standard are its rear wheel anti-lock brakes that give you controlled, smooth stopping. That's the kind of security you should demand from any braking system. And Chevy's got it.
Even with all the work we put this truck through, it still looks like new. The double-walled cargo box keeps any wear on the inside from showing through on the outside.
And all of Chevy's fleet-side pickup trucks give us the option of two-tier loading. So we have the option of using the box as is or creating a second loading level. Okay, that's good. Whether we're carrying passengers, hauling cargo, or pulling a trailer, this all-wheel drive Chevy Astro passenger van is the perfect vehicle.
With its combination of all-wheel drive and four-wheel anti-lock brakes, this van gives us the control we need, even in the worst weather.
In fact, the Chevy Astro van has the largest towing capacity of any van in its class, and its versatility makes sense for every do-it-yourselfer.
The spacious cargo area is ideal for hauling these shrubs or any other material. And with these available Dutch doors, loading is even more convenient. No matter what size of your project, you'll get the job done with a Chevy truck.
They've been a big part of every Hometime project, and it's easy for us to see why the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks are Chevy trucks. A little more coffee?
Not for me, I'm done, thank you. Back to work.
I might just as well.
Well, we're out of our workshop now and in a home that was built in 1912. Now, older homes like this were often built with elaborate woodwork and built-ins. For instance, in this room, they have this wonderful built-in oak buffet and lots of oak on the walls and on the ceiling.
Well, very seldom do you see this much woodwork in a new house, and if you do, it's extremely expensive. So it's kind of one of the joys of owning an older house.
One of the drawbacks, however, is that somebody somewhere along the line may have taken this great wood and put a couple layers of paint on it.
And that's exactly what we've got here. We're doing something about it. Now, we could take this woodwork, remove it from the wall, take it out to the garage and strip it out there, bring it back in, and nail it up again to the wall. But that'd be a lot of work.
So we're going to show you how to strip it in place. The first step is to mask any area where we don't want the stripper to go. Now, this archway is part natural wood, so we want to protect that, as well as the wall that's next to the trim and the hardwood floor.
Now, the product we're using here is another non-toxic stripper. In fact, the process is going to look a lot like what we did on the black dresser back in the workshop. All right, start by brushing it on. You want to layer about 1/8 of an inch thick over everything. Especially be sure to work it into joints or any detailed areas.
The stripper needs to stay on for a while, so it comes with its own paper to cover it so it doesn't dry out before it's had a chance to do its thing.
And like all strippers, you want to leave it alone long enough for the chemical to actually do the stripping. And depending on how much paint you're trying to take off, you may leave it up here for a couple of hours or maybe even as long as 2 days.
We already did a little test area here and figured out that it's going to work best for us to leave this overnight. So, how's it look?
I say we give it a try.
Okay. The paper we've got covering the stripper is keeping it from drying out, but it's also designed to help pull the paint off of the wood.
Well, most of this, it looks like, is coming off with the paper. Although I do have to help a little bit every now and again with this plastic scraper. Once all the paper's removed, any paint that's left will probably have to be scrubbed a little bit. And to do that, we'll use a water rinse.
We start by scraping off any loose chunks that are left. And then we go at it with water and a scrubbing pad. This is the only really messy part of the job. So watch out, Dean, it might drip down here.
Well, this is a little easier than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
It took us about a half hour to put it on yesterday, and then about 2 hours to take it off again today.
That's pretty close. I realize there are a couple of versions of this product. We could have gone with a stronger, faster version, but then we run the risk of discoloring the wood, which isn't a problem if you plan on painting over the top of it. But our plan is to stain and varnish, so we didn't take any chances. We went with a mild version.
Actually, any of the 3 strippers that we've used on this program could have been used on any of the 3 projects. They all seem to do the job.
Yeah, you just want to evaluate what's going to work best for your job, taking into account cost, convenience, speed, and of course, don't forget safety.
Did you find the glue?
Yep, got it right
Good.
here.
I got the clamps.
Good enough. All right, well, we're all set to refinish our 2 pieces here, the desk and dresser. Now, the challenge with this dresser is going to be dealing with these dark marks and scratches. Our desk, we're going to stain this a reddish color. It should complement the mahogany, and we don't have to worry about it clashing with any of the old stain.
Because we're going to be staining these pieces, how we prepare the surface is crucial. It's far more important than if we were just going to paint them.
But before we start any finishing, we want to check the pieces out to see if they need any repairs. Well, for instance, the side of this dresser drawer is loose. In fact, it's been falling off on us as we've been stripping the piece. It's a pretty simple repair job. We'll just glue it back together and then clamp it. This is regular carpenter's glue. Put it on all the gaps of the dovetail joint and a little here on the butt end. Now, I put the pieces together. We'll let the glue squeeze out and harden. After it's dry, we'll just scrape it off. And I secure everything with a clamp. I notice I have a little piece of wood here on the front of the drawer to keep from marring the surface.
We've also got a real important repair to make on this desk. If we don't fix it, the desk is literally going to fall apart. This small piece that holds these 2 ends together has come loose on one end. Now, fortunately, all that we need to fix it is a little glue.
Put a little glue in each hole here. There's a cracked block on the backside. Get some glue on that.
We also found some other loose joints on the top of the desk, so we've squirted some glue in those. Now I'm just securing the whole thing with a web clamp. You know, Dean, I'm wondering if we need a little block here on the corners to protect the wood.
Well, I tell you what, why don't you crank that down a little bit.
Okay.
We'll see how tight we have to get it, all right? Well, that looks pretty good. I don't think we'll need any blocks. We should get that screw in there, though, just to hold it nice and tight.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
That ought to hold it.
Yeah, and of course, when we screw the top down on the desk, that's going to help hold the sections of it together. So I guess now all we have to do is let the glue set overnight.
And we can start staining tomorrow. Okay. Well, once the drips of glue have dried, they come off pretty easily with a putty knife or a razor blade. Of course, we'll be sanding the whole thing anyway, and that'll take off the rest of the glue.
Now we're ready to talk about picking finishes. Now this can be rather tricky because you never really know how a particular finish is going to look on a particular piece of stripped wood until you actually do it. But one way to get a preview of this is to wet the wood down with mineral spirits. When you do this, you get an idea of how the wood would look if you were just going to put a clear finish on it, no stain. On the dresser, we're not exactly sure what wood it's made out of, but this test tells us it's going to get fairly dark. So we've picked a pretty light stain, something that's just going to give it a little color, a little warmth.
Over here on the desk, the drawer fronts and desktop are solid mahogany. That rich red color is really going to come out when these get finished. But the desk base is made up of several different materials, and they'll take stain differently. Now, the mahogany plywood sides and back look a little bland once they were stripped. But the red mahogany color is going to come out when we finish it. See? Look at that.
However, the frame pieces, which we think are made out of poplar, they don't have any of that red color in them.
So we're planning on using a very light brown stain on the mahogany pieces. We think that's going to darken them up just a bit, but still allow the natural red color of the wood to show through.
You know, I still think we should consider just putting a clear varnish here on the mahogany rather than a stain. I like that.
Well, when we get to that, we can do a little test and see which one we like best.
Yeah, okay.
We're also going to use that light brown stain on these frame pieces to see how that looks. But we've got a reddish stain as a backup so that we can match these frame pieces with the mahogany.
We'll really be doing it on kind of a trial and error basis. We'll have to improvise as we go. But the first thing is sanding both of the pieces.
So how's it going?
Well, it's working, but I don't think we're going to get these scratches out here.
Yeah, I think you're right. When we're trying to decide what to do about all these scratches and marks, we've gotten a couple places on this dresser.
I probably could get them out, but I'll bet I didn't take an 1/8 of an inch out of the wood, which would look pretty ugly unless we did it across the whole top.
Yeah. And as it is, I bet all the sanding you've done is going to make the stain take a little different there.
No, I think you're right. Tell you what, why don't we just hand sand this and get on with it?
Right. So what we're going to do before we stain is just do a light hand sanding over the whole piece. This preliminary sanding does a couple of things. The most important is that it undoes the effects of the water we used to rinse the piece when we were done stripping. When water comes into contact with raw wood, it raises the grain of the wood. The sanding removes that sort of fuzzy effect on the surface. And as you can see, we're not trying to sand out any of the marks or dents. We're not attempting to hide the fact that this piece has some history.
For this preliminary sanding, we're using a medium fine, ordinary aluminum oxide paper, between 150 and 180 grit. Of course, you always sand in the direction of the grain, and you should always use a sanding block of some sort. It can be as simple as a plain wooden block. If you don't use a block, you might end up getting an uneven effect from your fingers.
When you get to curved surfaces, there are all sorts of sanding tools you can try out. And we've found that these foam sanding pads work pretty well. The end on this one doesn't have any abrasive, which is helpful if you're trying not to scratch across the grain at a joint.
People are also using these synthetic pads for sanding. We like these for working on round pieces, like the legs on the dresser. Now, pads like these can sometimes take the place of steel wool. They work for us because sometimes we like to use water-based finishes. And steel wool, water, and wood just don't mix. You can end up with some really ugly-looking black marks. So we try to avoid the use of steel wool whenever possible. Professionals like to use it a lot, but at the same time, they don't use many water-based finishes.
And good sanding takes a lot of patience, but it's not really hard work. Just remember that the more carefully you sand now, the better the job's going to be in the end. Now, for example, here on the desktop, we've got joints where the grain is perpendicular to itself. What I need to do here is start off sanding with the grain in this direction first. Then when I've done that, I sand with the grain along the edge of the top. This way I can sand out any scratches that I put in when I sanded in the first direction. Now, don't forget you've got to clean off all the sanding dust before you put the finish on. You might see some people using a vacuum cleaner with a brush attachment, or you can just do it the low-tech way with a tack cloth. It's just a sticky piece of cheesecloth. This is a really simple step, but it's crucial for getting a good finish.
We're ready to apply some color to the pieces now. It's always a good idea to use a work pot. And we're using an oil-based stain. It's still the most popular today. It's definitely the most foolproof. Now, applying stain to this dresser should be pretty straightforward. Now, we use a brush to put it on, and you can be pretty generous with it. Oil-based stain isn't going to dry real quick, and it's going to be absorbed very evenly by the wood. You can really slop it on and let it soak in. The only exception is right here. So I'm going to use my rag to wipe a little bit of this piece off the end grain. Now, you don't want this spot to get too dark. I'm working sort of from the bottom up and covering this whole side.
Now don't worry about any runs or drips. All these will disappear when you wipe the excess off. Once I've got stain all the way up the side, I'll wipe it off. You're not trying to wipe it dry, you're just evening it out. See, those are looking real nice.
Yeah.
What stain did you end up going with?
Well, I did a little test on the back over here. This is the cherry stain. See how it reinforces the red in the mahogany?
Yeah, you really can.
And down here on these frame pieces, whatever wood this is, that cherry stain makes it look the same as the mahogany.
Now, that's a pretty good match.
Yeah.
So you're just about done then, huh?
Yeah, I just have the base left here.
See, this top turned out really nice.
Yeah, I'm really pleased.
Love that mahogany.
Well, that should do it.
With an oil-based stain, you want to let it set overnight before you move on to the next steps.
And in the meantime, we want to stay clear of this area. We don't want to raise up any dust that might settle on the furniture.
Whoa, I got that one. Okay. So do you still like that cherry color now that it's dry?
Oh, yeah, but it looked a lot nicer when it was wet. A little, I don't know, richer.
And of course, that'll come back once we varnish it.
Yeah. But aren't we going to use tung oil on these?
Ooh, that's right. Just about forgot. Well, we're ready for the clear finishes. Now, it seems like just about everybody has their own techniques for applying these coats. And of course, everybody will tell you theirs is the absolute only way to do it.
So, for instance, your Grandma Jean, who's been doing this for years in her spare time, she's going to tell you one way to do it. And then the guy in the paint store, he's going to tell you something else. And of course, we're going to tell you something different from either of them. Here you go.
Thanks. So you should use whatever tools and materials work best for you. We'll be showing you a couple of different techniques. Hopefully you'll get a chance to try those. Now, the first thing we're going to start on here is this dresser. We're going to apply a thin coat of varnish. Now, what's different about this is it's a water-based varnish, kind of like latex paint, except it's clear, or it'll dry clear. Actually, it goes on milky. Don't let that scare you. Well, different brands of finish can be made a little differently, so don't take anything for granted. Follow the directions on the label. Well, generally, for varnishes, the most important thing is to brush them on evenly with long, consistent strokes, going with the grain. There's always a temptation to go back and try to smooth the surface out with your brush. Do this as little as possible. The more times you brush the same spot, the more likely it is to hold the brush marks when it dries, and the more likely you are to bring some bubbles up to the surface. So spread it out smoothly and evenly, and don't fuss with it. Water-based varnishes tend to be a little bit runnier than oil-based varnishes, so you want to watch out for drips. I like to keep a dry brush on hand to kind of wipe up after myself here. Now again, because this is a water-based product, make sure you're using synthetic brushes. Okay.
Now, on the desk, we're going to use something different, a tung oil finish. Now, this is not pure tung oil. That's an old-fashioned finish that takes forever to dry. This is a mixture of a couple of things, including tung oil, that make it real easy to use. In fact, you just wipe it on. There's nothing real complicated about this. Get some on a rag and wipe it onto the wood. You do need to be careful that you're using a clean cotton cloth, one that doesn't have a lot of color in it or lint. Now, this finish takes a couple of hours to dry, so you can go over it a few times with your rag. But just make sure you get everything covered and that you don't have any major runs or drips. Wiping the finish on is a real foolproof way of doing it. Because the desk has all this detail work, that would make it a real pain to brush. The only time you might need a brush is to push the finish into tight little joints. So how's it going over there?
Real good. I'll be done with the dresser here in just a minute. I notice I've been using a work pot. I haven't been dipping my brush directly into the can of varnish. The reason for that is You can contaminate the brush. You can get dust on it. Sometimes you can even pull stain up off the piece of furniture. And you don't want that getting in the large can of varnish. If you contaminate anything, just do the little bit of varnish in your work pot.
The tung oil takes at least 6 hours to dry. How about the varnish?
About 3 to 4.
Do you have any plans?
Nope.
Do you want to grab a clean cloth and help me clean off these handles
sure.
for the desk?
Yeah, I can do that.
Great, thanks.
Well, the dresser's all dry now. Eventually, we'll be putting 3 or 4 coats of varnish on it. But it's essential that in between each coat, you sand thoroughly. Get the sand right here. Go. This is a real light sanding. You want to be very careful not to sand through into the stain. All you're doing is taking down any rough spots in the first coat of the varnish. You want to be especially gentle around edges and corners. It's real easy to sand through in these spots. If you use sandpaper, you should use a very fine grit between 350 and 400. And again, use some sort of sanding block to make sure you're applying pressure very evenly. Here I'm using one of our sanding pads, and I've wrapped a piece of fine sandpaper around it.
Of course, there's all different kinds of tools you could choose from to sand with. Now, I've got one of our synthetic pads here. It's that steel wool substitute. The wipe-on oil finish gives us a pretty thin coat, so sandpaper's probably too abrasive. The pads allow us to smooth the finish out very gently.
Now, even the light sanding we're doing will create some dust, so we're cleaning it off using a tack cloth before we apply the next coat. So from here on, both projects should follow pretty much the same pattern. Apply the finish, let it dry, sand it smooth, clean it off, and then apply the next coat.
The wipe-on finish goes on so thin, it may take 7 or 8 coats before we get the protection for the desk that we want. But it also goes on so quick that I may be finished with the desk, even though it's complicated, in the same amount of time it takes Dean to brush the varnish on the dresser, which is pretty simple.
Well, the tough part's over now. So what we've got left is just a few of the final touches. And one of those is this new hardware. Probably one of the simplest things you can do to help transform a dresser like this is to put new drawer pulls on it.
On the desk here, we didn't actually replace the pulls. We just polished those up a little bit. Say, polishing these really accent the wood, don't they?
Yeah, I think that little bit of brass polish did as much for this desk as all that stripper and stain.
Yeah, that could be. Now we have to figure out what to do with the leather.
Yeah. We picked up a couple of different leather cleaners from a shoe repair shop to see what we could do about cleaning up the leather tops of this desk. Okay.
Well, that doesn't seem to be doing anything. Try the saddle soap. Well, that's not much better.
No. Boy, do you think it's okay if I peel a little of this up?
You know, I'll bet we end up replacing the whole thing anyway.
Yeah.
Boy, look at that. Must be some sort of shellac or varnish somebody put on top of this leather.
I think it's a goner. Shall I bring out the vinyl?
Why don't you? Well, since it looks like this leather's a lost cause, it'd be too expensive to put on a new piece of leather, we're using something that a couple of people have recommended to us.
We bought a yard of imitation vinyl leather at a fabric shop. We think it's going to look just fine when all is said and done.
In fact, I think I'm going to like the blue color better.
Me too.
I'll get this old leather off here.
Okay.
All right, I'll try not to get any glue on my fingers here.
Yeah, this is a pretty good fit here.
And I think we cut it pretty straight.
to come up a little bit more over on this side here.
This down. There you go. Oh, that's looking nice.
Boy, that doesn't look too bad. That blue gives it kind of an executive look, don't you think?
Well, especially considering we only have $5 worth of vinyl here versus what we could have spent $200 on real leather.
Yeah. Well, that ends the refinishing for these two pieces. Now, some people would recommend that you apply a coat of wax or polish.
But we think the clear finishes we used on here are strong enough. It really doesn't need any additional protection.
Now, people claim that wax gives the wood a real rich luster, but the finishes that we used have a satin gloss to them. They're not too shiny, so the wood already has a real nice glow.
So we've covered a couple of different wood refinishing projects, but these techniques can be used on something other than furniture or millwork.
When you strip and refinish furniture and woodwork, you're probably going to encounter some potentially dangerous chemicals. Well, since we first broadcast this program on Hometime, we've encountered some serious debate on exactly how to dispose of these chemicals and their effect on the environment. So we'd like to show you some new guidelines. You should be concerned about leftover oil and latex paints, glues, solvents, and paint stripper residues, especially since there's a good chance that the strip paint contains lead. In some areas, you're allowed to throw these materials out with your household trash. Well, contact your city or county to find out what's permitted. Also find out if there's a hazardous household chemical pickup or drop-off location in your area. It'd be better to dispose of all of these materials through this type of program, if it's available, so that they can be handled as hazardous chemicals. However, we want you to know that even government-approved hazardous waste landfills may eventually leak these chemicals into the environment. So there's really no simple answer. Probably one of the best things you can do is only buy the material you need so there's no leftovers. Also, since pregnant women and children are the people most at risk from lead exposure, do everything you can to keep them away from lead paint dust, chips, and stripping residue. Thanks for watching. Hometime is made possible by Chevy Truck. Who brings you? Chevy full-size pickups, today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S-Series pickups, today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy's Astro all-wheel drive, today's mid-size van with standard four-wheel anti-lock brakes. Chevy trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. The National Hometime PBS series is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley's been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.